As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
The UK Tory government is taking the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament to court, questioning the legality of the act that has been passed by a cross-party majority in the Scottish Parliament to try and protect devolved law from the consequences of Brexit.
What's your thoughts on Brexit?
I think it's an absolute burrach.
I think the Brexit debate really, and the mess that's being made, is kind of supercharging the independence discussion.
The fact that Broadcasting Scotland, about the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists
Government, how much will arise in Barnett consequentials from the reduction in business rates that was announced in the UK budget, and whether it will allocate all of this support to Scotland's retail sector?
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
We received £42.9 million consequentials from the UK retail discount scheme. This is in the context, of course, of the real terms cut to Scotland's resource block grant of £2 billion since 2010. As the member will be aware, Barnett consequentials accrue to the Scottish Ministers, and decisions on the full package of non-domestic rates measures for 2019-20 will be made as part of our Scottish budget process. We have a competitive non-domestic rates package and do not actively hypothecate Barnett consequentials other than health.
Bill Bowman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As reported in the press this week, according to the Scottish Retail Consortium, 11.1% of Scotland's shop units were vacant last month compared to the UK rate of 9.6%. In October, footfall plummeted by 7.5% on high streets. While the UK plans to give £900 million towards business rates relief, cutting a third of expenses for small retailers, the SNP has doubled the large business supplement, costing businesses hundreds of millions of pounds. With Scottish resale facing real difficulty, why can't the Scottish Government commit now to having the large business supplement and matching the UK's rate support for retail, and give some good news for firms in Dundee's High Street, Reform Street and elsewhere?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, the UK Government's working wonders on the British economy right now, isn't it? No wonder the UK's got the lowest forecast GDP performance of any EU nation at the moment, so I'll take no lectures from the Tories on how to run an economy, any part of the economy. It's really interesting that Bill Bowman mentions Dundee High Street. Of course, Dundee High Street, like most other high streets, would have benefited from the small business bonus that has protected so many of our retail properties across the country, opposed by the Conservatives in your failure to support our successive budgets, which have ensured that Scotland has the most competitive package of business rates anywhere in the United Kingdom, and I will keep that reputation as we go towards the Scottish budget. But if I replicated all the decisions that the Tories make in terms of Barnett consequentials, that means replicating the cuts as well. And this party, this government, makes different choices on our public services. So we will make the right decisions by the people of Scotland and support our economy in a far more credible way.
Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Government set out how many recipients there are in the Small Business Bonus Scheme in 2018-19, and how much is being provided in relief over this period? And how does this measure up to the SNP's manifesto commitment to lift 100,000 properties out of business rates altogether?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'll take great pleasure in updating the Chamber on those numbers. The Small Business Bonus Scheme has provided a record £254 million in relief to 119,400 properties in 2018-19. Therefore, we have met our manifesto commitment, lifting 104,500 recipients out of business rates altogether.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Support for the retail sector will not be helped by the fact that there are 470,000 people in Scotland not being paid the living wage. That's an unacceptably high figure and means a large portion of these people do not have the money in order to spend and support these shops. Will the Cabinet Secretary support Labour's plan for a £10 an hour living wage, and what consideration will the Cabinet Secretary give in his draft budget to address the unacceptably high number of people who are not being paid the living wage?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, it would just be better if real devolutionists ensure that the power to set the living wage rested with this Parliament rather than in Westminster. But yes, I am looking at the decisions that we can take around the living wage. Of course, it's the Living Wage Foundation that sets the rate that we've pledged to follow. We'll continue to do that. I'm looking at those other matters, and I'm looking at retail and specific sectors as well, recognising that some sectors have more challenges than others in the delivery of the principle. But when it comes to a fair work agenda, I think this government has delivered more than any other in the UK and any more than any previous administration has done in taking forward the living wage and fair work agenda.
Question number 2, Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to reduce the inequalities faced by autistic people and people with a learning disability.
Minister Claire Hockey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are committed to transforming the lives of autistic people and people with learning disabilities. We've listened to their aspirations and needs and want to address the inequalities they face throughout their lives. Our programme for government sets out our priorities, and we want autistic people and people with learning disabilities to have the same freedoms and opportunities as other citizens of Scotland. Next month, we will launch the refreshed The Keys to Life implementation framework, and it recognises that people with learning disabilities have the same aspirations and expectations as any other person.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank the Minister for her answer, and can she assure me that discussions are being held right across portfolios in government, in education, health, employability, social security and other departments, so that the holistic approach can be used to make sure that people with autism and learning disabilities are given good life opportunities and improving their independence?
Minister.
As the member has highlighted, autistic people and people with learning disabilities need holistic support right across health, social care, employability, education, criminal justice, social security and social connectedness. In refreshing both the autism and the learning disability strategies, wide engagement has taken place across relevant Scottish Government portfolios. Examples are the cross-policy links with employability and equality colleagues, which led to a commitment to half the disability employment gap. And another was the engagement with social security colleagues, which led to the inclusion of autistic people in designing the new social security system.
Thank you. Question number 3, Gail Ross.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its involvement with the Highland Council regarding the Stromeferry bypass in Wester Ross.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The A890 at Stromeferry is a local road and is the responsibility of Highland Council. Transport Scotland have provided technical advice to council officials and their consultants on the transport appraisal process since 2013, and I can confirm they are in receipt of the final appraisal report. The report reflects the substantial amount of work undertaken as part of the appraisal process, and a response will be provided in the near future. As Roads Authority for the A90 at Stromeferry, final responsibility for a decision to upgrade or improve the route ultimately lies with the Highland Council.
Gail Ross.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Given that the report into the condition of the rock face is now in the public domain, will the Scottish Government agree to work on a sustainable, economically viable solution to this lifeline route with the Highland Council and Network Rail?
Minister. Sir, I recognise the importance of this route to communities across Ms Ross's constituency. The Highland Council have just recently provided Michael Matheson, as I say, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity, with a copy of the report prepared by the consultants ACOM. Officials at Transport Scotland are currently reviewing this, along with the transport appraisal prepared by the Council, which includes the options that have been identified therein, and they'll continue to provide technical assistance as necessary to identify the correct solutions. They have also worked very closely with the Highland Council and Network Rail to identify a temporary solution in terms of the crossing on the railway. But as Roads Authority for the A890 at Stromeferry, the final responsibility for a decision to upgrade or improve the route, as I said earlier in my previous answer, ultimately lies with the Council. But I give a commitment to Gail Ross that we'll continue to work closely with the Council.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the past, blasting has been used to remove the overhanging rocks at Stromeferry. This has weakened 4 specific areas. A permanent solution to this will cost £5 million. Will the Minister offer to help the Highland Council fund the £5 million to sort out the 4 overhangs until Transport Scotland can respond to the report that was submitted over a year ago?
Minister.
I can't give any commitments on funding today, as the member will appreciate the Cabinet Secretary is not here, but I will certainly relay his question to him. We certainly recognise the importance of trying to provide as much relief to local users of the infrastructure in the meantime while a longer-term solution is provided. Certainly, as I said to Gail Ross, we're committed to providing as much technical support to the Council and indeed Network Rail to identify a solution, but I appreciate discussions around funding will have to take place, but that is a matter for the Cabinet Secretary.
Question number 4, Shona Robison.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made since the establishment of the Action Group for the Michelin plant in Dundee.
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
On Monday, I convened the first meeting of the Action Group, where the members agreed the purpose, remit and actions will pursue all possibilities for retaining and or repurposing the plant as a matter of urgency, and are actively working with pace and vigour on our proposition. I've again pressed the UK Government to bring what it can to the table, including seeking additional resource via city deals or indeed industrial strategy resources, and I will keep members advised accordingly.
Shona Robison.
Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the options will include looking at more than one option to put to Michelin, including retention and repurposing? And can the Cabinet Secretary outline what commitments were made by the UK Government at the Action Group meeting, including any additional resources that could be made available either through the Tay Cities deal or other funding sources, and how that sits with the comments made to the media after the meeting by the Secretary of State for Scotland? Can he shed any light on that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Shona Robison asked a really important question around the range of options. I've been clear at the Action Group and with members that the company Michelin don't wish to revisit their decision, but are interested in the proposition that we'll put to them in approximately 2 weeks' time. And so we are looking at a range of options to put forward based on the best intelligence that we have. In relation to the contribution of the UK Government, we're relying on the UK Government to help us co-produce that proposition with the intelligence and the support that they can bring to bear. And of course I have made requests around additional resources as well, with the clarity that we have on the Tay Cities deal, industrial strategy and sector deals. I can neither confirm nor clarify the remarks of the current Secretary of State, because at the Action Group meeting and in the private meetings I've had, I was given assurances that the UK Government will assist us to co-produce that proposition and would look at funding streams so to do. I also got that agreement from Greg Clark, the UK Government's Business Secretary. And my next call after First Minister's questions is with another UK Government Minister in relation to the industrial strategy. So I can't square what the UK Government has said to me in terms of bringing support for Michelin with what the Secretary of State said to the Courier on the day of the Action Group. I hope that the support is forthcoming, and that's what I'm working on, so that we can genuinely work in partnership to put the best possible proposition to Michelin so that we can secure an ongoing presence by the company at the site. And I think on that we should be all absolutely united.
Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to media reports, the Scottish Government has invested £8 million in the Michelin plant. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm the status of this investment, and can he confirm that this investment will be used as leverage to secure as many jobs as possible at the plant?
Cabinet Secretary.
What a disappointing response from the Conservatives, I have to say, in terms of our collective efforts. The leverage we have with Michelin right now because they're genuinely interested in our industrial proposition for this country, the work in research and development, the skills that we have, the legacy, the workforce that we have in Dundee, and the goodwill across that action group to put forward the best possible proposition. I've said before, there are Scottish enterprise grants that were there to help the plant transform, and it was doing that. If we come to the issue of leverage around clawback, then of course that will be used. But right now, the priority has to be focusing on continuing with a commercial manufacturing function at the Dundee site and ensuring that the company has an ongoing presence, and we do everything we can to retain as many jobs as possible in view of the position of the company not to revisit their original decision. So I'll leave no stone unturned, explore every avenue to put the best possible proposition to Michelin, and I could be doing with support from UK Government to get the best possible outcome for the people of Dundee.
And Jenny Mara.
I'd like to reiterate the support of the Labour benches to the work of the action group that the Cabinet Secretary has convened. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that all parties at the group are committed to working together to get the best possible proposal and result for the Michelin workforce and for Dundee?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, they are. All attendees at the action group and the other business and industry experts that will help feed into that are given us the necessary intelligence and assistance to put forward the best possible proposition. It's that sense of solidarity and unity where the workforce are key as well, the local authority members and others. So I appreciate the cross-party support that we've enjoyed so far to take forward that work, and that will keep us energised as we get to that opportunity to present the case to Michelin.
Question number 5, Tom Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when recommendations will be published for the location of 3 national neonatal intensive care units, as outlined in 2017, the Best Start report's 5-year plan.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
The perinatal subgroup of the Best Start Implementation Programme Board is currently undertaking an options appraisal to identify the locations of the neonatal intensive care units. This work will move into a testing phase shortly, after which recommendations on those locations will be made to me.
Tom Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In 3 recent written questions, I asked the Cabinet Secretary whether she thought it was acceptable for prematurely born babies to travel between the North East and the Central Belt for emergency neonatal intensive care treatment. She did not answer, instead citing potential transport links between the two. Let us be clear, we are talking about life-saving treatment for the most vulnerable babies. Will she not accept that any attempt to remove this lifeline service from the north of Scotland would be ill-advised and it would be simply dangerous?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Mr Mason will recall, in the answer to those questions, I also made it absolutely clear that no neonatal units will close as a result of the Best Start recommendations for neonatal intensive care, and the Best Start does not recommend a reduction in the number of neonatal care centres in NHS Grampian or indeed anywhere else. The point I am making is that the testing for intensive neonatal care is in the option appraisal stage at this point. It will then move to a testing stage, and those recommendations will come to me at that point. At that point, I will make what I consider to be reasoned decisions based on those recommendations and that testing. But let me repeat, no neonatal units will close as a result of the Best Start recommendations that came from a group of highly experienced practitioners, the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Nursing, obstetricians, consultant anaesthetists and many others, and I will work with their clinical judgment about the best maternity care and configuration for women and babies in Scotland, and not Mr Mason's.
Question number 6, Anna Sarwar.
To ask the Scottish Government what funding it provides to arts and culture facilities in Glasgow.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government continues to provide extensive support to the arts in Glasgow. 4 out of the 5 national performing companies are based in Glasgow, receiving over £20 million of grant a year. We've also invested extensively in Glasgow's cultural infrastructure, including £6.25 million towards the Kelvin Hall refurbishment, enabling the National Library of Scotland to have a core presence in Glasgow for the first time in a joint project with Glasgow Museums and the Hunterian. We're currently investing £5 million in the Borough Renaissance project and £6 million in the Citizens Theatre redevelopment. All of this current investment is on top of the Festival 2018 cultural programme in Glasgow as part of the highly successful European Championships, of course supported with £63 million of Scottish Government funding.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. You will be aware that there is no central funding for the day-to-day running of the national facilities in Glasgow, and that compares to the tens of millions that goes to facilities in Edinburgh. At the same time, there has been a 20% cut in Glasgow's budget. Will she review the funding of our arts and cultural facilities in Glasgow to look at running costs?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member is mistaken. If you'd listened to my answer, the national facilities that are in Glasgow are 4 out of the 5 national performing companies, and they receive over £20 million of grant a year. Glasgow is well funded, and of course I didn't mention the £27.5 million of funding from Creative Scotland for regular funded organisations, the £8.5 million grant for the RSNO at the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall, or the £5.45 million of grant for Scottish Opera as part of Glasgow Theatre Royal. I think Glasgow is doing extremely well from support for arts and funding from the Scottish Government.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the arts in North Ayrshire received only £192,000 in grants last year compared to the £20 million she mentioned for Glasgow. So per capita, Glasgow receives almost 25 times as much as North Ayrshire. What steps will the Scottish Government work in conjunction with Creative Scotland take to build capacity in North Ayrshire and help close that gap?
Cabinet Secretary. Well, one of the things that we are supporting is obviously the Creative Scotland's Place partnerships. North Ayrshire is part of that. We've protected in the last year Creative Scotland's budget. Indeed, we've increased it by £6.6 million to make sure rectify the shortfall from the UK National Lottery funding. Of course, more can be done to make sure the reach and range of cultural funding reaches communities across North Ayrshire and other areas, and I'm happy to supply the member with more information about that.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and that concludes general questions. We turn now to First Minister's questions, and we start with question number 1 from Jackson Carlow.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've learnt over the last 2 years that the First Minister has become a great fan of unions. So, can the First Minister explain why would it be in Scotland's interest to fracture the one union that matters most to us, our own, with the rest of the United Kingdom?
First Minister.
Well, of course, the European Union is a union of independent countries, and look how it has stood by and stood up for Ireland over these last 2 years. By contrast, as I said to the Prime Minister on the telephone just last night, the United Kingdom government has ignored Scotland, sidelined Scotland, cast aside Scotland's interests, now stands on the brink not just of taking us out of the European Union against our will, or taking us out of the single market against our interests. They now stand on the brink of placing Scotland at a real competitive disadvantage with Northern Ireland. That's not an academic or an abstract argument. That will have real implications for jobs and living standards and investment in Scotland. So I don't think the Tories care a jot about that. Of course, it's not so long ago that the Secretary of State for Scotland, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, were saying that if there was a separate relationship with the UK for Northern Ireland, they would resign. Where is David Mundell today?
Jackson Carlow. Order, please. Jackson Carlow.
Let me be absolutely crystal clear. Others may be abandoning their post, but none of us on these benches are going anywhere. We'll be staying here. We'll be staying right here every day, every week, holding this First Minister and this Scottish Government to account. And let me be also clear. Ruth Davidson and David Mundell have spent the last year fighting for the United Kingdom. They're not going to take any lessons from anyone else. Not any carpetbagger who's come late to the defence of the United Kingdom, and certainly not from this First Minister.
First Minister.
Well, just try to strike one note of consensus here. I agree with Jackson Carlaw when he says that the Tories are staying exactly where they are. It's called opposition, and they don't deserve to be anywhere else. Now, you know, I always thought it was a really odd position for Ruth Davidson and David Mundell to argue against Northern Ireland getting a deal that protects their vital interests. Instead of arguing for Scotland to get a similar deal, it was standing up for the DUP rather than standing up for Scotland. But, you know, having chosen that red line, and they chose it, then it is really, really hard to see how they stay in office after today with a shred of credibility. Let me quote the letter from David Mundell and Ruth Davidson just a few weeks ago. Any deal that undermines the integrity of the UK internal market or of the United Kingdom, that was a red line. They were briefing, that was a resignation issue. And then you've got Dominic Raab today, the Brexit Secretary, who's been involved in these negotiations, being very clear. This deal presents a very real threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom. Esther McVey saying exactly the same. Now, if I was as cynical and as completely self-serving as the Tories, that actually might tempt me to vote for this deal, but I am not. But what is absolutely unclear to me is how David Mundell or Ruth Davidson can have any other option but to follow through on the principled commitment that they made. So let's see, over the course of today, do they have any principle? Do they have a backbone between them? I suspect that answer is going to be a resounding no.
Jackson Carlaw.
First Minister, let's be candid with the Chamber. You and I have one very particular thing in common. Neither of us is going to be First Minister after the next Scottish election. But I know a woman who will be, and I'm just keeping her seat warm. Fracturing the UK internal market is exactly what the First Minister continually proposes. How if Scotland were to have a different trading arrangement from England, then as night follows day, we would create a problem where none currently exists, a border at Berwick. Scotland facing restrictions on a trading market 4 times as important to us as the EU. How is that standing up for Scotland? How can this possibly help our country prosper?
First Minister.
Jackson Carlaw used to have a reputation for half-decent jokes. I think that reputation has been completely shattered over the course of this session. But Jackson Carlaw has just stood here and uttered the phrase, "No problem currently exists." Is he watching what is happening in the House of Commons right now? The Tory government is imploding as we speak. People the length and breadth of the UK are seriously worried about their jobs, about their living standards, all of which are on the line because of the ideology of this Tory government and the complete shambles that they have made of the negotiation. How dare Jackson Carlaw stand in this chamber and say there is no problem? There is a big problem for Scotland, and let me spell it out to Jackson Carlaw. Scotland faces being taken out of the European Union against our democratic wishes. Scotland faces being taken out of the single market against our economic interests. And now we face being put at a competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland. That's what the Tories are presiding over. And Jackson Carlaw and every single member of the Tory benches should be completely and utterly ashamed of themselves.
Jackson Carlaw.
It's the same tired old lines from the same tired old First Minister. You know, this First Minister made her priorities clear the morning after the 2016 referendum result. Before even the votes had been counted, her first actions were to get onto her civil servants, demanding they start drafting a bill for an independence referendum. It's been that grudge and grievance agenda that has seen her act in a way which is nothing other than destructive to the negotiations that have been taking place over the last 2 years. And everything she has said and done since has been pursued relentlessly with that goal in mind, even now using the history of Northern Ireland with all the desperate turmoil that is involved for her singular political advantage. That's the disgrace today. So turn the First Minister's cliché in its own head. She should be thoroughly ashamed of herself. The First Minister exploiting the coming days to pursue her own goals as she has done over recent months, over and over again, is fundamentally against the country's interests. We need a First Minister acting for all of Scotland. Is it at times she acted in the national interest, not the nationalist interest? With everything that's going on, and acknowledging that, will she now take her threat of a second independence referendum and all the additional disruption that would cause off the table? Will she, yes or no?
First Minister.
Talk about tired old rhetoric. There's only one person in this chamber indulging in that today. And what a nerve! What a nerve for Jackson Carlaw to come to this chamber and talk about the importance of finding solutions for Northern Ireland. It was David Mundell and Ruth Davidson who wrote to the Prime Minister opposing a separate deal for Northern Ireland. All I'm asking for is if Northern Ireland is to get a separate deal for very good reasons, I support that, then Scotland should not be placed at a disadvantage as a result of that. And as for Jackson Carlaw's statement that the Scottish Government has been, destructive to the negotiations. Scotland hasn't been allowed into these negotiations. We haven't had the opportunity to be destructive to the negotiations. Now, I do support remaining in the European Union. I've been consistent about that. But from day one, I have put forward compromises. I have put forward the compromise of the UK staying in the single market and the customs union. I've lost count of the number of times I have asked the Prime Minister to consider that sensible option. But she's been too busy pandering to the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, I think the chickens are going to come home to roost on that today, as Jacob Rees-Mogg and his colleagues probably bring her down. I'm pretty confident, because I'll put my case to the Scottish people, that I'll be First Minister after the next Scottish election. I'm not confident the Prime Minister will be in office by the end of today, such as the shambles she has created of these negotiations. And as I said earlier on, she should be ashamed of that. Jackson Carlaw should be ashamed of that. And every single Tory in the country should be ashamed of the mess they're creating for people the length and breadth of the UK.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, Theresa May's government is falling apart before our very eyes. The Northern Ireland Minister, gone. The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, gone. Even the Secretary of State for Brexit, gone. So can I ask the First Minister, does she agree with me that it is time for the wretched Tory government to go as well?
First Minister.
Yes.
Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, nothing is more emblematic of this Tory government's bankruptcy than universal credit. The rollout of the flawed universal credit is not only socially unjust, it is morally wrong. It is pushing people into poverty, into homelessness and into debt. And the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has just resigned. And why? Because of David Cameron's arrogance in calling a referendum, and because of Theresa May's desperation in making promises that she knew she could never keep. So will the First Minister instruct her government this afternoon to urgently contact the DWP to press again for the rollout of universal credits to be halted?
First Minister.
If Richard Leonard wants me to do that, yes, I will do that. But I've also lost count of the number of times the Scottish Government have contacted the DWP asking for universal credit to be scrapped, for rollout to be halted. But can I make a better suggestion to Richard Leonard? Can I ask that he joins me, and we can do it together this afternoon. I'll sign a joint letter with him, that we write a letter to the Prime Minister, if she's still in office, or to her successor, or to the DWP, and we ask for power over universal credit to be taken out of the hands of the Tories and put into the hands of this Parliament. That's a better suggestion. So, I know it's First Minister's questions, but indulge me in asking Richard Leonard a question. Will you join me in making that call this afternoon?
Richard Leonard.
First Minister, I've got a better idea. Let's call for a general election. The First Minister and I do not agree on many things, but I think we do agree that Theresa May's Brexit deal is a bad deal, and that's why Labour MPs will vote against the deal, and as I understand it, SNP MPs will do the same. Presiding Officer, it's my firm belief that this deal will not be agreed to by the House of Commons, that this shambolic Tory government needs to go, and that the people need, more than anything, a general election as a matter of urgency. So, First Minister, will you join with Labour to defeat the deal, and will you back an early general election?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I just let me unpack this step by step. Firstly, I think we've just had confirmation there, yet again, that Richard Leonard would rather leave powers over welfare in the hands of a Tory government than bring them back to this Parliament. And shame on him for that. As people suffer under universal credit and all of these welfare cuts, they will look at Labour and wonder why that is the case. But let me turn again to the Brexit deal. I think it's reasonable to say, if memory serves me correctly, that the SNP made clear, I made it clear to Willie Rennie in this chamber this afternoon, that the SNP MPs would vote against this deal. I think we did that before Labour did, so it's perhaps Labour joining with the SNP. But I hope no party in the House of Commons falls for the Prime Minister's spin that it's a case of accepting a bad deal for fear of no deal. No deal is not inevitable if this bad deal is voted down. But there is one question that remains to be answered. If that happens, what actually is Labour's position on Brexit? So again, I don't know if he's got another question, but perhaps he can enlighten us today. Do they favour single market and customs union? Do they favour another vote? What exactly would Labour do on Brexit that is different to what Theresa May is doing? Because I don't have a clue. Maybe Richard Leonard can tell us.
We've got a number of constituency supplementaries. The first is from Joanne Lamond.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is all too aware of the terrible impact of the contaminated blood scandal on so many Scottish people and their families. And indeed, the First Minister has played an important role in seeking to address the disgraceful injustice so many have suffered, and critically confirming that she and her government accepted the moral responsibility to provide support, including financial support, to all victims. First Minister, a constituent met with me this week to highlight her concerns and those of the Scottish Infected Blood Forum and Haemophilia Scotland about imminent decisions by her government on financial support, which are in danger of continuing the inconsistent gap in financial support between the advanced as opposed to chronically infected, a gap which is simply unjustifiable. Would the First Minister reflect on the distress being caused by reports that decisions to financial entitlement may be determined not by the clear evidence of need, but by predetermined budget constraints? Given the important role of Scotland in seeking justice for victims, will the First Minister agree to meet with me, my constituent, and those who have supported victims to ensure that we in Scotland live up to our moral responsibility to all victims of contaminated blood?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Joanne Lamont for raising an issue? As she says, I've had a long-standing involvement in this issue. It was an issue I campaigned on when I was in opposition, and I've retained that interest as Health Minister and latterly as First Minister. I know many of the people who have been affected. I have one in particular constituent of mine that I understand the issues from very clearly indeed. I want to, and the Scottish Government is determined to see justice delivered. I will ask the Health Secretary to meet with Joanne Lamont where we can discuss where we are in terms of the progress around amended payments, and we can ensure that we listen to the representations that a constituent has made to her and that my constituents make to me. So I will ensure that that meeting can happen as quickly as possible.
Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. Would the First Minister agree that the decision by Talgo to choose Longannet as a site for their train manufacturing base, creating 1,000 jobs, could be a wonderful legacy for the communities who serve the power station? And does she also believe that reopening the Alloa-Dunfermline rail route to passengers should also be part of that legacy for workers and for their communities?
First Minister.
Well, I warmly welcome Talgo's announcement this week. Michael Matheson was in London for that announcement. I myself met with the senior executives of Talgo some time ago to make the case for Scotland, so I think all of us are delighted that this announcement has been made. It is good news for Longannet and the surrounding area. I think Mark Ruskell is right to talk about the legacy benefits of that, and transport links will be a key part of that, so we will absolutely consider all of that as we work with Talgo to make the preparations. Obviously, this decision is to some extent dependent on that company winning the contract for HS2 that they are bidding for, but we would hope that regardless of the outcomes of that, we can persuade Talgo to go ahead with that manufacturing site for all of the benefits that we know that it will bring, including the ones that Mark Ruskell raises.
Finlay Carson.
Given the huge success of the Galloway National Park Association Conference, with overwhelming support from young and not so young constituents of Galloway and West Dumfries, will the First Minister recognise the work of the Galloway National Park Association and give a commitment to initiate preliminary investigations into the feasibility of a Kingdom of Galloway National Park, which can now clearly be seen to have community and local authority support?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for raising this issue? Of course, this was an issue that our late presiding officer took a very close interest in and worked very hard to progress. I understand and appreciate the arguments that are made for a Galloway National Park. It's certainly something that we want to give full consideration to, and I'm happy to ask the relevant minister to engage with the member and with others in an interest to look at how we take these things forward properly.
Mark Griffin.
Presiding Officer, I want to raise the case of Sebastian Skelton, a 13-month-old infant whose mother Siobhan is struggling to get the treatment he needs from our National Health Service. Days after he was born, Sebastian developed food intolerances, which have now developed considerably. And more than a year later, he still hasn't been seen by the allergy specialist and is still going without an NHS prescription for the medication he needs. And Siobhan, his mother, has been forced to take matters into her own hands and sought help from private specialist doctors in London and Glasgow. Now, having written to the Health Secretary 7 weeks ago seeking urgent intervention and support, I've still to receive a response. Can I ask the First Minister to look into Sebastian's case and give him and his family the help they urgently need?
First Minister.
Well, yes, I will give that undertaking today beyond what Mark Griffin has narrated in the Chamber today. I don't know the full details of Sebastian's case, but clearly we are talking about a young baby. I can understand the distress of his parents, and we would all want to see that baby get the treatment he needs as quickly as possible. I will ask the Health Secretary to look into it as a matter of urgency and come back to the member as soon as we've had the opportunity to do so. But I would also ask him to convey my very best wishes to Sebastian and to his family.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's another day, it's another dose of Brexit chaos. The Prime Minister's deal, so-called, satisfies almost nobody, from Brexiteers to Remainers. It's unlikely to pass at Westminster, and the public must ultimately be given the chance to kill off Brexit in a people's vote. But if the last 2 years have made anything clear, it's that Scotland's future is best secured as a full, independent EU member state. The First Minister stated in this chamber in summer last year that at the end of the period of negotiation with the EU, when the terms of Brexit will be clearer, we will come back to Parliament to set out our judgment on the best way forward at that time, including our view on the precise timescale for offering the people a choice over the country's future. Now, Jackson Carlaw might not want to know the answer to that, but I want to know the answer to that, and I don't think I'm alone in wanting to know the answer. Will the First Minister now confirm to us that Scotland will be given that choice, and when?
Well, I will, as I said at the time, Patrick Harvey has alluded to there, I will come back to the Chamber and set out my views on the precise detail of that when we have clarity. Obviously, we now have seen the terms of the deal. It remains to be seen whether that makes it to a vote in the House of Commons over the next couple of weeks. We will see how that whole sorry saga plays out, and then I will give that commitment, undertake that commitment, as I said I would. Let me say two things in addition, though. Firstly, I have no doubt that Scotland will get an opportunity to choose again on the question of independence, and when it does, I am confident that Scotland will choose to be an independent country, because the last 2 years, from the decision that risked taking us out of the EU against our will, to the way in which the Scottish Government, trying to represent the interests of Scotland, has been sidelined, to the way in which the powers of this Parliament have been undermined, the case for independence has grown stronger each and every single day. And the sooner this Parliament is independent, the sooner this country is independent, no longer at the mercy of Tory governments who do not have our interests at heart, the better. And that time will come, and when it does, I have no doubt that the people of Scotland will choose to be independent.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, the First Minister is right that we've only just seen this deal, and it is conceivable that MPs might vote for it. I think highly unlikely. But there is already, surely, enough clarity to make a judgment, because there's nothing in Theresa May's plan that protects the social, economic and workplace rights that we have, nothing that protects the environmental rights and protections that we have, nothing to guarantee the future rights of EU citizens living here, or our ability to attract more of the people we need for the strength of our economy, the delivery of our public services, or the diversity of our society. And there's not a single reference to Scotland, either in the withdrawal agreement or in the absurdly simplistic paper on the future relationship. Look, the chaos of Brexit was inevitable, but we also need to face up to the equally inevitable fact that Scotland will only get the strong future relationship we want with Europe, as the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland voted for, if we get out there, campaign for it, and persuade people to vote for Scotland to become a full, independent EU member country. The Greens are ready to start that campaign. Is the First Minister?
First Minister.
The SNP started it a long, long time ago and have never stopped campaigning for independence. So my message to Patrick Harvey was, what's holding you back? Get out there and make the case for Scotland to be an independent country. Look, I agree with everything Patrick Harvey said there. I think the case for independence, which I have long thought has been made, has got stronger with every day that has passed over the last 2 years. In terms of the precise timing of Scotland having that opportunity to choose, I do think people deserve a bit of clarity about what else might unfold over the next period. Are we going to have another general election? Is there going to be a second EU referendum? And, you know, I think it is reasonable to wait and allow this to play out over these next few weeks. But there is no doubt in my mind that this country is going to become an independent country, and it will be a far more prosperous, fairer and better country when it does. It will be able to choose its own place in the world. It will be able to make its own decisions. Undoubtedly, it will make its own mistakes, but it will not be at the mercy of a Tory government imposing policies on us that we did not vote for, and that will be a far stronger position for this generation and for future generations to be in.
Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
We were promised Northern Ireland would not be affected, but it is. That there would be a free trade deal, but there isn't. The UK would not be subject to EU laws, but it will be. Our fishing grounds would be protected, but they won't. And the biggest lie of all, there's not £350 million a week for the NHS. The people have been cheated. Can the First Minister think of a single reason why there should not be a people's vote so we can stop Brexit now?
First Minister. I've made my views on this clear. Willie Rennie and I have had this exchange now many times. If there is a proposal for a people's vote, I think that we should support that. I think people across the UK should have that opportunity. I guess the same question that I've posed to Willie Rennie, though, remains. What if the result in a second referendum is the same as it was in 2016? Scotland votes overwhelmingly, probably even more overwhelmingly, to remain in the EU, but the UK as a whole votes to leave. And I will posit that again to Willie Rennie. What would he suggest Scotland does in those circumstances?
Willie Rennie.
And the First Minister knows that I think we can win this people's vote. I want to keep the United Kingdom together, and I want to keep us in the European Union as well. The future of this deal could lie in the hands of Scottish Conservative MPs. They've been ignored on fishing, ignored on Northern Ireland, but they still do nothing. They are as useless as a piano in a pigsty. As ministers resign on principle, where are the principles of the Scottish Conservatives? The Prime Minister said that stopping Brexit is now an option. With the Cabinet divided and the Parliament split, the case for a people's vote grows stronger every day. Now is the best chance. Does the First Minister agree that this Parliament and her government's first priority should be to secure that people's vote?
First Minister.
I've got a feeling there was an insult to pigs somewhere in Willie Rennie's question, but I can't quite work out what it was, so I probably shouldn't go any further down that road. What I would say, if he's right, and the future of the deal and the future of the country depends on the 13 Conservative MPs, then we're all doomed, because what they have demonstrated is that they don't have a backbone between them, and they will sell Scotland out as quickly as anything. But on the issue, yes, I think if there's an opportunity to stop Brexit in its tracks across the whole of the UK, then we should take that. I have no doubt in my mind about that, because the promises that were made in 2016 have been proven to be, in most cases, lies. The negotiation has been shambolic, and we're left in the position we're in today, where there is a bad deal, and the Tories, having spent, the Prime Minister having spent the last 2 years saying that no deal is better than a bad deal, is now in the ridiculous, pathetic position of saying that a bad deal is better than no deal. So if that opportunity to stop it in its tracks is there, yes, I think people across the UK should take that. But I want to do more than that. I want to make sure that, as well as hopefully stopping Brexit in its tracks, we can ensure that never, ever again is Scotland put in the position of facing something like Brexit against our democratic wishes. Yep. And a second EU referendum, while it might stop Brexit, doesn't guarantee that that will be the case. So Willie Rennie dodged that question the first time, but he can't continue to dodge that question. I'll support a people's vote to stop Brexit, but if Scotland yet again finds itself in the position of facing Brexit against its will Willie Rennie support independence so that we can take control of our own future?
Thank you. We've got quite a lot of interest in asking supplementaries. The first from Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister, like me, welcome the U-turn by the UK Government and at long last the reduction of the stakes of fob tea machines to £2 will finally be introduced from April 2019? And what steps can the Scottish Government also take, well, help to take, to tackle the issue of problem gambling, particularly with young people?
First Minister.
Yes, I do welcome this U-turn, although it is long overdue. Let me also take the opportunity to congratulate Stuart McMillan on all of the very good and hard work he has done on this issue. We've been clear for a long time that action like this is needed. Earlier this month, the Community Safety Minister wrote to the UK Government expressing concern about the delay in the implementation of this policy, and I do commend Stuart and all campaigners on this issue following a sustained and effective campaign for such a move. The Scottish Government encourages any actions that can help reduce the harmful impact of problem gambling. That's why we are seeking to deliver faster access to psychological therapies for people with mental illnesses, including those who have problems with gambling. Those seeking clinical support will benefit from the work being done also through the mental health strategy. So the Scottish Government will continue to take action where we can, but we look to the UK Government to take this action, which is, as I say, long overdue, but I'm glad that it is now happening.
Anna Sarwar to be followed by Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, the first multi-faith remembrance service will be held in Constituency for the soldiers of the British Indian Army whose graves have been discovered there and elsewhere in Scotland. These 13 young men came to Scotland, having been evacuated from Dunkirk during the Second World War. They are our forgotten heroes. Ali Bahadur, Bari Sher, Dadan Khan, Fazl Ali, Khan Muhammad, Kushi Muhammad, Muhammad Siddiq, Mushtaq Ahmed, Mir Zaman, Abdul Rahman, Ghulam Nabi, and Karam Dad. Does the First Minister agree with me that their names should be forgotten no more, and there should be a permanent memorial in Scotland to commemorate their lives and that of the 161,000 soldiers of the British Indian Army who lost their lives in defence of our country, so that their contribution is remembered for generations to come.
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with Anna Sarwar and thank him for raising this issue and for raising it in the way he did. He's right to say that these were forgotten heroes. Today, as a result of that question, their names are on the official report of the Scottish Parliament and they will be forgotten no longer. So for that, let me thank Anna Sarwar. I welcome the multi-faith remembrance service that's taking place today. I think that is very fitting and it's an opportunity to remember with gratitude the contribution of the British Indian Army to the war effort. Of course, we've just passed Armistice Day, where we commemorated the centenary of the end of the First World War and also remembered all of those who have lost their lives in conflicts throughout the last century. And we must make sure that when we do that, we remember everybody. I certainly would be very happy to take forward discussions about the possibility of a permanent memorial, and I will ask the relevant minister to contact Anna Sarwar to kick off those discussions as soon as possible.
Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Polly McNeill.
Thank you, President Officer. Given that it's now clear that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal is dead in the water and it cannot command a majority in the House of Commons, will the First Minister commit to working with others so that we can replace the current Westminster chaos with a common-sense plan to keep Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom in the single market and the customs union? The people of this country, who are very worried at this very moment about what's going on, deserve a pragmatic and sensible solution. How can the First Minister help?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Bruce Crawford is right to say that the deal that the Prime Minister has brought forward is dead in the water. I mean, she doesn't need me to tell her that. Her own backbenchers have been lining up in the House of Commons this morning to tell her that. Let me say a word about the Prime Minister, because I think she does deserve a degree of respect for the resilience she has shown in trying to bring forward a deal that she thought was the right thing to do. So, I will gladly say that about her, but she has to recognise the reality of the position she faces. The deal is not going to get through the House of Commons. And therefore it is wrong for anybody to suggest that that means crashing out with no deal on the 29th of March next year is an inevitability. It is not an inevitability. There is now a duty on everyone, principally in the House of Commons, because that's where the decisions are taken, to come together to look at sensible alternatives. Now, I've said consistently that single market customs union membership for the whole of the UK would be the best possible compromise position. It's not my top preference. I would rather we stayed in the European Union. But if we're looking at compromises, that is both the best one and it's also the one, and I readily say there's no guarantee of this, but it is the only compromise that I can look at the House of Commons and actually see a path to a majority for. So this is the moment for people, yes, to put party interests aside and to come together and find a way through this. Simply blundering on with a deal that is destined to fail is not putting the interests of the country first, and I appeal to the Prime Minister not to do that.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by John Finney.
Thank you. The tragic death of 16-year-old William Lindsay in Bowman prison whilst on remand raises many sharp questions about our criminal justice system and in particular the availability of secure accommodation, and I'm sure the First Minister will join with me in offering condolences to William's family. But is the First Minister aware that by all accounts those who worked with William said that he was crying out for help and that prison was not the right place for a young man who spent his life in care? Can the First Minister explain why the 2016-2017 figures show a reduction of 11% in the number of secure places and the complete closure of one unit with 29% decline in the use of residents in Scotland? Does the First Minister agree that for these reasons and many more, there is a need for an urgent review of the availability of secure accommodation?
First Minister.
Well, this is a serious issue that, yes, does have to be seriously looked at. The Cabinet discussed this at some length in the context of this tragic case just on Tuesday. Let me start, of course, by putting on record my sincere condolences to the family of William Lindsay, who I know is also known as William Brown. I would also take the opportunity to put on record my condolences to the family of Katie Allen, who also died in Pullman recently. Hamza Youssef met with her family earlier this week, and I'm grateful to them for taking the time to attend that meeting and to allow us to hear their views about their dreadful experience. I don't think any of us can imagine the distress that both of these families are going through. Clearly, we are determined that any lessons that need to be learned will be learned. All appropriate agencies must look closely at what happened here. There will be mandatory fatal accident inquiries in these cases, of course, and while these processes are ongoing, I think it would not be appropriate for me to get into the details of the individual cases. But what I will say, looking in particular right now at the case of William Lindsay, there are a number of things that I know as First Minister I want to address and make sure we look at properly. Experience in the care system, for example, we have the independent review of the care system underway right now. The issue of secure care provision is certainly one of those issues. How we do even more to keep young people out of the criminal justice system altogether, and of course the issues of mental health support within Pullman itself. So these are all issues under the active consideration of the Scottish Government. As I say, there will be mandatory FEIs in these cases, rightly so, but we will not wait for that before taking action that we consider is necessary to make sure that any issues here are properly addressed.
John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware of 2 instances of illegal scallop dredging in protected area of Wester Ross. I've consistently raised the issue of maritime protection and enforcement, and that's particularly with regard to the expansion of MPAs and Brexit, and been assured it's under review. Does the First Minister agree with Open Seas that there is now a clear case for robust, tamper-proof vessel tracking?
First Minister.
I have seen this morning some reports of the instances that John Finney has raised. I haven't yet had the opportunity to look into all of the details of that. Certainly the suggestion that John Finney has made is one that is worthy of our consideration. I will ask the Environment Secretary to look into this issue in more depth and then contact John Finney to discuss the matter further.
Thank you. Question number 5, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is marking Anti-Bullying Week.
First Minister.
Anti-Bullying Week 2018 provides us with the opportunity to send a clear and positive message that bullying of any kind is totally unacceptable, and when it happens, we all have a responsibility to address it. The theme is Choose Respect, which reinforces the messages of respect, positive relationships and empathy, and I would encourage everyone to spread that message. I was particularly pleased that in time for the start of Anti-Bullying Week last Thursday, the Deputy First Minister was able to announce that we have accepted in full the recommendations of the LGBTI Inclusive Education Working Group report, including its recommendations on tackling bullying. That's just the latest substantial step forward we are taking. I'm sure the whole Chamber will agree that we must always look to instil the values of tolerance and respect in our children and young people to help them develop positive relationships.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the First Minister for that response. We know that bullying can have an extremely damaging effect on a young person's mental health, and in some tragic cases can result in suicide or attempted suicide. What can be done to assist schools to better support those who are bullied at school, as well as those who perpetrate bullying, who may also be experiencing difficulties elsewhere?
First Minister.
Well, Fulton McGregor is right to raise this issue. We take child and adolescent mental health very seriously. We've discussed in this chamber many times previously the challenges of making sure that services are there in the right places for young people. Our commitment to invest over £60 million in additional school counselling services, supporting 350 counsellors, will however help to ensure that support is in place. Respect for All is our national approach to preventing and responding to bullying incidents. It makes clear that bullying is not just the responsibility of schools, but of all adults involved in the lives of young people, including supporting the child experiencing bullying and the child displaying bullying behaviour. Respect for All includes an expectation that all schools develop and implement an anti-bullying policy, which should be reviewed and updated on a regular basis.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 7 weeks ago, First Minister, you would not agree to a full independent inquiry into allegations of bullying at NHS Highland. Given that we're now going to have an independent inquiry, can you confirm that the Scottish Government will encourage all those that they believe that were bullied, including any that have signed non-disclosure agreements, to give evidence?
First Minister.
I would encourage not just encourage but support anybody who has experience of bullying in NHS Tayside or anywhere else to come forward and discuss their experience. So I absolutely agree with that, and I hope all of the Chamber will welcome the action the Health Secretary is taking, which sends a very clear message that we will not tolerate bullying in any organisation.
Question number 6, Jamie Green.
To ask the First Minister what plans the Scottish Government has to evaluate the impact on sales of minimum unit pricing of alcohol.
First Minister.
Scotland's world-leading minimum pricing measure targets the low-cost, high-strength alcohol which causes so much damage to our communities. It's been in place now for just 6 months. A reason for introducing minimum unit pricing is specifically to reduce alcohol-related harms. It will, of course, be at least a couple of years before necessary data is available to analyse impacts robustly. Our extensive monitoring and evaluation programme is being led by NHS Health Scotland, and it includes examining implementation and compliance, price and product range, alcohol sales and consumption, alcohol-related harm and the economic impact on industry. And I look forward to seeing full and robust data when considering the range of impacts that the policy is having.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the First Minister for the confirmation of that ongoing monitoring, but she may be aware that since the legislation came into effect 6 months ago, sales of one well-known and quite potent drink has increased by 11%, in what some people regard as a trade-off as drinkers move from one high-strength product to another. Now, we all hope that this is not an unintended consequence of the policy, and whilst it benefited from cross-party support at the time, it was conditional on a sensible sunset clause, and this will ensure that a fact-based approach would form the basis of the success or otherwise of the legislation. So can I ask the First Minister, what public health targets were set in relation to the introduction of minimum unit pricing, and are those targets being met?
First Minister.
Do you know, it was to the credit of the Tories, Jackson Carlow in particular, if I may say so, that the Tories actually supported minimum unit pricing. They did so before, I don't even know if Labour does yet support minimum unit pricing. But really, it's not been in place for more than 6 months yet, and already Jamie Green appears to be shaping up to criticise it. For goodness sake, let us give it a chance. The sunset clause was put in place. I think it was Jackson Carlow that proposed the amendment for that. The government accepted it. We put in place robust monitoring and review procedures, and all of the indicators around that will be properly monitored. Of course, the experts here themselves point out it is far too early to start to judge the success of this policy. We also have seen some indication of a rise in alcohol sales, a substantial rise in sales in England, more than in Scotland, which, if there is any early indications, might be that minimum unit pricing has helped to peg that back in Scotland. So I hope we continue to have the support of the Scottish Conservatives. This is an important policy. It was a brave move of this Parliament to put it into place. I believe that it will work, but let's give it a chance and let's do the monitoring in the proper and full way.
Thank you very much. That concludes First Minister's questions. We'll move on shortly to members' business in the name of Ruth Maguire on Day of the Imprisoned Writer. Until
Hello from Jersey Square. I got my copy of the National. It took me a wee while because it was sold out in the first shop, so I have this copy. It was the last one in the shop. Yesterday I was participating in the Full Scottish with Broadcasting in Scotland, and we were speaking about this kind of blackout. The SNP, the third biggest party in the whole UK, and you, Channel 4, are giving platform to the far right, to Farage, who has no representation whatsoever in the UK, and not to the SNP. Oh, come on, that's not very nice. Yesterday we were talking about the media, and we were talking about the EU resolution against the neo-Nazis and the far right and the fascist organization. We were talking about how important is fair and balanced media and the responsibility of the media when we're reporting about this kind of guys such as Bannon or Farage, or in Spain, for example, about Vox and the Falange, etc. We need responsible media. So I encourage all of you to support your platforms, your true platforms. Broadcasting Scotland is doing a great job. The Broadcasting Scotland team is a wonderful team and they need your help. So please consider subscribing to Broadcasting Scotland. And now they are crowdfunding, so I encourage all of you to donate to Broadcasting Scotland. I remember that we need to say no more to fascism, to say no more to this kind of disgraceful media. See you next time. Cheers.